Hello, and welcome to the newest Pokemon type tier list. I know that you've been clamoring for the newest episode. You've been on the edge of your seat, foaming at the mouth with excitement for the new upload. And I'm sorry, I've just had a weird couple weeks, but we're back on track. We're still going to be able to finish all of the tier lists that I have planned by the time the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet come out. And then, of course, I'll review all of the new Pokemon in the new generation. So, today we are doing Poison type, and spoiler alert, Poison is my favorite overall type of Pokemon. I'm a big bug fan, obviously I was gushing a lot about the bug types, but Poison is just that one step up for me. It's got a lot of heavy hitters, and actually kind of quite a few forgettable or off-putting ones, but we'll get to those when we get to them. But let's just jump into the tier list, going in reverse generation order, starting with Eternatus. I am not a big fan of legendary Pokemon. We all know this. I've spoken poorly about Zacian and Zamazenta. Eternatus is kind of an interesting case where it's this like aggressively artificial thing. It kind of even fits in with the Ultra Beasts, and I don't necessarily know how it fits into that sort of like Ultra Beast lore. But the fact that it's comprised of like a bunch of tiny little connecting parts, and it's sort of like a Lego figurine of a Pokemon. It reminds me a lot of the, and I don't mean this necessarily as a diss, but it reminds me a lot of the general visual design of like the Michael Bay Transformers movies. How like you can see all of the individual parts that a lot of the monster or the machines are designed from. And it's kind of an interesting take on a legendary Pokemon as this sort of extra-dimensional being. I'm still going to put it in C tier just because it's a little too much, and its Eternamax form is like, it's just a hand. Okay. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I could see why some people like it. It's got interesting qualities to it. Naganadel, I love the fact that Poipole, the pre-evolved form, is named Poipole because it's purple, Poipole. I think that's just like a fun and cute name. But Naganadel's pretty interesting too. I like the fact that it's a syringe. A lot of the Ultra Beasts are based off of like real life objects, like Xurkitree is like garland lights, Kartana is an origami figurine, and Naganadel is a syringe. I think it's an interesting concept. Poison Dragon is an increasingly common type, actually. There are 3 poison dragon types now. There were none for forever, but now there are 3. And it's an interesting enough concept. I would have a hard time putting it above B tier. I'm just not super into it. I think that the Ultra Beasts tend to either not really live up to what I was hoping for, or are really fun and interesting sort of evocations of those sorts of real world objects. Naganadel is kind of the weird case where it's just like a perfect middling, like I don't love it, but I don't hate it, sort of B tier Pokemon. I really want to like Salazzle, but it's too anthropomorphic, you know, it's too humanoid, it's very sexualized of a design. It's very off-putting in that regard, obviously, but yeah, I can't put Salazzle above D tier. Just for it's the low punny thing. It's the just all of the furry bait Pokemon that have existed over the generations. Salazzle is just like too obvious of a case of that. Anyways, as mentioned, Poison is my favorite overall type, and we're finally getting into ones that I actually like. I think that recent generations have just had some real duds in terms of Poison types, but we're about to get into heavy hitters, starting with Toxapex. Such a strong concept for a Pokemon. It's sort of like an evolution in design concept of Fortress from Gen 2, how it's this like mobile fortress Pokemon that's got the spiky exterior, you know, it's got the poison barb jab element to it, and you know, Marini and Toxapex have that unique ability that I don't know exactly what it does, but it makes it so that you suffer consequences if you try to attack them. Like it's such a fun and strong concept, and like I said, sort of an evolution of Fortress. It's this sort of platonic ideal of a defensive Pokemon, and so I got to put it in A tier. I was so excited for Dragalge when it was finally announced because, again, Poison Dragon was a type that didn't exist for 5 generations, and then now there are 3 of them. But it was this new, like, fresh off the presses, fun kind of idea of like, it's a seahorse that's covered in like a bunch of seaweed and algae that's sort of like decrepit and shriveled up, and then it evolves into this poisonous dragon fish seahorse kind of thing. And I was just so excited for the fact that like there was finally a poison dragon type. It was something that I'd wanted for so long. Still not a bug dragon. Bug dragon gotta come soon, please and thank you. But yeah, I'm a really big Dragalge fan. It was something that I was very excited when I saw it, and I think it works as this sort of like shriveled up, emaciated kind of creature. And it's just sort of an interesting sort of design concept. Like, it doesn't look overtly strong, but it has that sort of like sturdy frame to it. You know, I feel like it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone what I'm about to do here, but Garbodor's in S tier. Like, if you don't like Garbodor, then I have nothing for you. Trubbish and Garbodor are like the poster children of, oh, Game Freak's running out of ideas. Oh, they're making Pokemon out of literal trash now. I'm boring and a nerd. And if you... Inanimate object Pokemon, I understand, are divisive for a lot of reasons. But, like, a literal animated garbage bag is such a fun and obvious concept for a poison-type Pokemon. And, like, people will point to, like, oh, well, you have an issue with Garbodor, but you didn't have any issue with Grimer and Muck, and they're just sentient piles of sludge. We'll get to other examples of people maybe saying that Pokemon are uninspired later in this video, but Garbodor's just great. Like, I look at Trubbish and Garbodor, and I just get this smile on my face. Like the weird razor blade teeth that they have going on, the rebar sticking out of them. It's such a strong design and like a fun concept that's executed as perfectly as it could be. Toxicroak, I'm kind of 50-50 on. I am a big frog fan. Krogunk, I think, is very, very cool. It has that sort of, like, cheeky smugness to it. I feel like the only reason it's fighting type instead of dark type is that there are already two poison dark types in the same generation, and they probably didn't want to tread similar ground. But, like, it has that sort of, like, scrappy dark type energy to it that I think is very, like, strong and evocative of the character of the Pokemon. I like the huge like frog ribbit sack thing. I'm not a frog expert, but I like the design. I like sort of like the way they emphasize the froggy elements of it while still making it sort of like an anthropomorphized bipedal type of scrappy fighter. It's a very interesting way of like keeping the frog elements while also making something that's like very not frog-like. And so like where Politoed didn't really succeed for me in terms of making a frog Pokemon, I think that Krogunk and Toxicroak kind of bring a lot of what I wanted out of a frog Pokemon. I'm still only going to put him high B tier. I think that it's not the greatest design out there, but I like a lot of what's going on. And as we all know, all frogs are poisonous. So there's that to consider. I really want to like Drapion. I really do. It's just the fact that its arm claws come out of its cheeks that's just very off-putting to me. It's almost like an Ultra Beast. It's kind of like the progenitor to Guzzlord, in that sense of like why are its arms coming out of the place that they're coming out of? I don't think that Drapion is as bad as Guzzlord, and Skorupi is obviously like a cute little guy. Poison Dark is a very cool typing. No complaints about that. I kind of wish it had stayed a bug type, but it's really like not a big deal. I get why it's the dark type to an extent. I just wish that its arms were just like a little lower, or that it just didn't have the like arm claws at all. Like if it was just that sort of like weird centipede dinosaur design. I think that would have been a lot better for me personally. But I really don't have anything against Drapion. Having a poison type skunk was an inspired design decision that I'm surprised it took them as long as it did to finally explore that as a possibility. And Skuntank is also going to be an S tier for me, and the fact that it has the fact that its tail is essentially a cannon, that it is a skunk tank, and it has that sort of like burly, strong core kind of design. I think that it just works on a lot of different levels. Stunky obviously has the kind of like butt face thing going on that's kind of cute in a very like gross and off-putting way. And the fact that like its cries are like little weird fart sounds, it's like it's such a childish and gross design, but like that's exactly what I want out of poison types. Like that's what makes poison types interesting to me, is the grossness, is the sort of like childish pollution of the designs that's very like interesting and endearing to me about them. And I think that Skuntank and Garbodor are sort of like the perfect representations of that. And I just really like Skuntank. I've grown very attached to it over the years. Seviper, poison snake viper that, bites you and injects you with poison. Obvious design concept, strong enough execution. I like it better than Arbok, but we'll get to Arbok. But I still couldn't reasonably put it above B tier because it's like, yeah, it's a poison snake. That's what snakes do, is they poison people or they constrict people. So, poison snake. It is what it is. Swalot, I think, is actually very underrated. I know that when I say Gulpin, a lot of you are gonna be, oh, I'm gonna make a dumb, crude joke. No, Gulpin is a precious little baby, and you need to watch your mouth when speaking of it. But I think that Swalot is really underrated. I think that, like, because it's sort of like a weird goo blob, a lot of people are just like, but there was already a weird goo blob back in Generation 1. But, like, the sort of, like, personality and shape of it, how it's more docile, it's more like cute and friendly than Muck I see as being a bit more like hulking and aggressive, whereas Swalot is just like a little baby. He's just a little guy. He's just like, look at me, I'm so small and cute. And I really love in the Colosseum and XD, the GameCube RPGs, that when Swalot attacks, it like opens its whole mouth, and like the whole front of its body is like this giant gaping maw. It's kind of like a Greed from Full Metal Alchemist, or no, not Greed, Gluttony from Full Metal Alchemist. How it's sort of like the whole front of its body opens up as being this like a mouth to consume or to, shoot out blasts of whatever. All this to say, I'm actually a really big Swalot fan. It's kind of on the border of A and S tier for me. I'm going to give it an S tier just because I think it is so underrated, and I'm a big fan of Swalot, just as a design concept. This is the moment that we've all been waiting for. I've mentioned it on TikTok, so if you're following me on YouTube here from TikTok, then you already pretty much know what's about to happen. I'm adding a row above, and I am renaming this tier to Giga Ultra Super S. And so the Giga Ultra Super S tier belongs to Crobat. Crobat is my favorite Pokemon. It's been my favorite Pokemon for a good 15 years now, probably. I just love so much stuff about it. Battle isn't necessarily considered, but I love the way that it's useful in battle. It's so blazingly fast. It's in that 130 base speed tier. It's a cross-generation evolution of a Pokemon that most people thought of being as just like kind of useless or kind of annoying, but it sort of like was able to transcend that reputation and just become this like straightforwardly cool and interesting Pokemon. I love the narrative of, Zubat being just like the most pathetic, useless piece of garbage. Like it uses Supersonic and then it gets taken out by a tackle. Like it has no stats worth speaking of. But you stick with it, you grind it out, You get it up to level 22 and it evolves into a Golbat, and it's like a little bit stronger, a little bit more useful. It can do some stuff. It can maybe make a couple of plays here and there. It's still not the best, but you keep with it. You grind it out. You grind it out. And finally, you max out the friendship value, and you're rewarded with this wonderful, powerful Pokemon. And it's just sort of this transition from like the ubiquitous annoyance to like this very special, treasured, rare thing. And like friendship evolutions are pretty easy, and like lots of people love Crobat, but I just love everything about it. The evolution of the design from Zubat, which is kind of a more realistic bat-like creature, into Golbat, which is like... Golbat is definitely the weak point of the evolutionary line, like where do its organs fit? But then Crobat is more of like a realistic animal. It's got the 4 wings going on to evoke the speediness of it. It's got that personality, that edge to it, that like that hint of aggression that I really love. Again, to bring up the GameCube RPGs, and I think that it was its design in Pokemon Stadium 2 as well. But early 3D models of Crobat really did it dirty. The more modern 3D models are a much better design, but I almost kind of love the ugliness of the early 3D models, the way that it's just like got these like huge gross teeth on it, and the sort of like grimace that it constantly had. It's I don't necessarily like it, but it had a lot of interest and personality to it, similar to Skuntank, similar to Garbodor. It had that kind of like edge and intrigue to it, that sort of like childishness, but in a fun and gross kind of way that you really want to see from poison types. I could rave about Crobat for much longer, but I'm not going to belabor the point and just say I'm a big fan. Big fan of everything going on here. Crobat is my favorite Pokemon, has been for a long time, probably will remain so for a long time. Weezing, I think, is a pretty strong design. I'm obviously very attached to it from being a kid watching the anime, how James's coughing and eventually wheezing was just this sort of like big nuisance to the main characters, and the voice acting for Weezing in the anime, how it was this sort of like raspy, wheezy kind of voice. It makes sense and it works. And I've used coughing and wheezing several times over the years. It's definitely one of my more favorite Pokemon to use in like an in-game playthrough. And it's got a lot of stuff that I like about it. I would probably put it top of A tier. I don't think that it does enough to really establish itself as like an S tier Pokemon just in terms of design, because it's just kind of like a cloud of smoke at the end of the day. But it works. I think Weezing works pretty well. Muck, it's a pile of poisonous sludge, and you know, I've said my piece about it, how people will rag on Garbodor. People mostly just forget about Swalot in my experience. Nobody really talks about Swalot, and I think that sucks because I think that Swalot is a really, really good design. Anyways, I think that Muck is perfectly serviceable. I think it kind of fits into like in with like Seviper, and we're gonna get to Arbok, but Arbok, of that sort of like, yeah, that makes sense. That's what a poison type should be like. But I've just never really had that strong of an affinity for Muck. On the whole, I think that it's good. It's perfectly serviceable. I don't have anything against it, but it's kind of basic and boring, I will admit. As much as I like poison types, as much as I've gushed about a lot of them, Muck, they can't all be winners, you know? And Muck isn't really... It's not bad, but it's not great either. Nidoking and Nidoqueen are, you know, I love the ways that they play off of each other, the sort of like kaiju design elements. They've just got a lot going on that I like. They're so iconic. They've been with Pokemon forever. They're that one guy that you can just like add to your team, and you know that they're going to be a consistent heavy hitter while also being able to take stuff in advance in like they're able to take hits decently well. Nidoqueen more than Nidoking. I think that they just work. They're that Pokemon that's just sort of like, they've been around forever. They're the all-rounders. They're all reliable. Like you pick one of these, put it on your team, and it's never going to do you dirty, in terms of in-game stats. And like the design of it is just like that sort of like classic Pokemon kaiju. They've got that similar body type to like Rhydon, and it just works, and they were the first Pokemon to have gender, which is very interesting. If they were released in a later generation, they would be technically considered probably the same Pokemon in the Pokedex, but because of the historical artifact of gender not being a mechanic in the first generation, they're two completely separate species. But I think it works. I think it's just one of those weird quirks of Pokemon history that like there's a lot about them to like. I've gotten attached to both of them over the years. I think they're fun to use in game, and I think that they're very strong and very Pokemon designs. They're very similar to like the Gen 1 starters in that way, that like they just evoke Pokemon to me. Like these are what Pokemon are supposed to look like. And finally, we're left with Arbok. I like the concept of Arbok, how it's got the big face on the cobra neck area, but like it's a poisonous snake. It's a cobra. Ekans is snake backwards, and Arbok is kind of cobra backwards. And I don't have anything against them, but I would consider them pretty interchangeable with Seviper and Muck, as being like they serve their purpose reasonably well. Like they're perfectly serviceable, but they don't inspire much interest beyond that. But with all that said, I'm a big poison type fan. I'm pretty sure I gushed about Crobat specifically for like 3 or 4 minutes. But I'm not a big Salazzle fan. I like Salandit pretty well, but I'm not a big Salazzle fan. But like everything else here is like reasonably good. And I'm not a big Eternatus fan. Drapion's kind of off-putting, but even then I could see why people like them, and I like a lot of what they have going on. It's just there are little nitpicks that I have with the design, but everyone else is just like, it's great. If you told me that any of these Pokemon above B tier were your favorite, then like I would totally understand that, and I have a lot of appreciation for them as well. Obviously with Crobat being the Giga Ultra Super S tier, standing above all others in the tier that it deserves for itself. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to the last couple of straggler tier lists. I'm probably going to release another one this week, but we'll see how everything works out in that regard. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you saw and would like to see more. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.